The month of August is shaping up as a particularly busy time for the Philippines' defense policy, which has been on a hyperdrive mode. Earlier in the month, two, not one, but two Chinese fighter jets harassed a Filipino patrol vessel near the Scarborough Shoal. Just a week later, there was another incident. Not one, but two Philippine Coast Guard vessels were around by Chinese counterparts near the Sabina Shoal. The incidents prove that China wants to remind the Philippines of its preponderance of force in the area. If anything, China wants to remind everyone that it's the big boss in town. Perhaps China's concern is that other ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, or Vietnam will be encouraged to also engage in their own resistance activities. Meanwhile, the Philippines is also strengthening its position. It has been showing no sign of compromise so far. If anything, the Philippines is doubling down on its wide network, in fact, widening network of security partnerships. First came the historic 2 plus 2 between the Philippines and the United States, the first in Manila, whereby America promised to give billions of dollars of aid over the next few years to the Philippines. To begin with, it will allocate up to $500 million to enhance the Philippines AFP and Coast Guard modernization in the coming year. But America is not the only ally in town. Germany, for the first time in recent memory, sent its defense minister, Pistorius, to Manila to explore closer military cooperation. Then came the first ever joint naval drills between the Philippines and Japan in the West Philippine Sea. Not long after, Vietnam also conducted its own joint drills with the Philippines as a show of growing cooperation and friendship. Is this the new golden era of Philippine defense policy? Is the China challenge forcing the Philippines to adopt more dynamic, multi-aligned foreign policy? How effective is the Philippines' current strategy? And is the Philippines well on its way to become a fully confident and self-reliant middle power? To understand these issues, we have a special guest.
Admiral, thank you very much for joining us again. Ang dami nangyari since last time nag-meet tayo. Daming ganap, right? Obviously, I want to talk about the big picture, the rise of the Philippines as a middle power. Anong klaseng mindset na kailangan natin? This emergence of, kind of a Philippine-style multi-alignment na hindi lang America. We're working with all sorts of different partners all around the world. And of course, how to move forward in terms of strengthening our position in the West Philippine Sea. But bago there, pag-usapan muna natin yung mga nangyaring latest developments sa West Philippine Sea. So as of August, the other week we had this incident sa Panatag Shoal kung saan we had, I think, two Chinese fighter jets, multi-role fighters engaging in very intimidating activities. For some reason, hindi masyadong na-breakdown yan ng international media. I think the details were a little bit sketchy, at least that's my understanding from the outside. But I'm sure you folks have more information on that. And then, of course, itong nakakabala din na more recently nangyari na binangga yung dalawang Coast Guard vessels natin malapit dun sa Kalayaan Group of Islands, sa mga others, Sabina Shoal, for instance. What's going on here? Because ang pagkaintindi namin is, di ba, dapat may interim agreement na dun sa Second Thomas Shoal, sa Ayungin Shoal. So is it China saying that, oh, you may get your way here, pero pwede namin kayo squeeze dito, or that, we're trying to show you who's the big boss? What is our interpretation of what's happening? What are the facts of this latest incidents, Admiral?
Allow me to start first with a bigger picture. Entire South China Sea, the end of China is sea control. The West Philippine Sea is part of the South China Sea. And within the West Philippine Sea, we have our 9 fissures. We have Baho de Masinloc. We have the northern islands, Batanes, Babuyan, up north. For the 9 fissures, Ayungin Shoal, because of the efforts of the DFA, we give credit to them. The agreement, we were able to conduct derore. But like what you mentioned, how come in Baho de Masinloc, the dropping of flares close to a Philippine Air Force aircraft? Then for Sabina Shoal, the ramming incident. I look at this as China exerting more effort to show them, like what you said, this particular agreement, informal agreement, was only for Ayungin Shoal. It would be different when it comes to the other features because they want to show that it doesn't cover the entire expanse of the West Philippine Sea. Their intent is still to control the entire South China Sea, of which West Philippine Sea is a part of.
Right. And of course, West Philippines is our exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. No,
Yes.
obviously we're pushing for extended continental shelf, but hindi ito yung kabuuan ng South China Sea. Now, going back to this, obviously, there's some confusion about ano ba talaga yung interim agreement na yan. Of course, we'll have folks from the DFA to explain their side. But from a Philippine Navy perspective, what was the interim agreement really all about? Because the Chinese are saying, oh, there's a notification mechanism. The DFA and our friends in the government keep on saying, no, there's no such thing. There's no permission seeking. At most, there's, I don't know, information exchange. Base sa pag-intindi ko dun sa statements ng different government agencies, National Security Council, and others, the other day about the latest incident sa West Philippine Sea, mukhang China misread the situation. Maybe they thought we're papunta tayo sa Sabina Shoal to fortify. Apparently, that was not what was happening. Papunta tayo sa Lawak and all. So, there are two things I want to understand, Admiral. On one hand, what is really this interim agreement, at least from a Philippine Navy standpoint? And then the second thing, do we need some sort of exchange of information pa rin para hindi magkakaroon ng overreaction by China? Because I think the Chinese are a little bit panicky now and they're scared na maisaan na naman sila. Because I think we really outsmarted them in the Ayungin Shoal.
Yeah, I would like to frame this from the perspective of defense and security, DND and the AFP. We leave it up to the appropriate agencies of government, like for this case, DFA, the talks, diplomacy, the agreement. From our side, we continue our patrols, we continue our rotation of troops and resupplying missions. And for this particular case, with appropriate guidance from higher headquarters, GHU and the Department of Defense, we conducted the RORE, utilizing a Coast Guard ship and a MV Lapu-Lapu, a civilian ship. And we were able to conduct the rotation of troops and giving them the supplies.
No incident, no intimidation.
No incident.
Yeah.
No incident. Whatever discussions were done on the table is beyond us.
Right.
For Sabina Shoal, if you recall, in the past 3 months, there have been reports of a pile-up of crushed corals.
Correct.
Whether these are man-made or effects of nature remains to be seen. The Coast Guard, in order to be assured that these are not man-made, they increased their presence. So with the Philippine Navy and the Air Force to overhead flights. The other side is scared that the Coast Guard ship would be there on a semi-permanent to permanent basis. Teresa Magbanwa, BRP Teresa Magbanwa.
Right.
So the other day, when the 2 patrol ships of the Coast Guard ships, were there to provide provisions to 2 other features, not to Magbanwa,
Yes.
they were the subject of illegal, coercive, aggressive actions. That's a picture behind what happened in Sabina Shoal.
And what do you think should be the way forward? Because, I think this is where I need to ask the question, because the main thrust of our policies of West Philippine Sea has been the transparency initiative, whereby we expose and we focus the sunlight on China's aggressive actions in violation of international law, different conventions. But it now has its own share of critics. There's some people who are saying, oh, this is not working, among other things. What is the utility of transparency initiative? Do you think it has to remain there? And how do you tweak it to make sure it's even more effective in the coming months?
First and foremost, the Transparent Initiative is one of the tools of government, one of the instruments of national power. It's not the only one. To expect a change in behavior of the Chinese Communist Party just through the Transparency Initiative is almost impossible. But that initiative plus the other instruments of power of the country, hopefully we could see a change in the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, giving out to the world and to the internal audience, the Filipino people, what the Chinese Communist Party is doing through the PLA Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Maritime Militia has had its effects. We have been successful in informing the Filipinos what they are doing. Na hindi ito kagagawan natin. Ito ay para sa atin. This is for the next generation of Filipinos. The wealth of the expanse of the maritime domain is for the next generation of Filipinos. And we are here fighting for what is ours. And based on recent surveys, we are successful.
You're looking at the more than 90% of Filipinos.
Yes, they know what
essentially
we're
on board.
fighting for. They know that this is ours. Hindi tayo may kagagawa ng gulo dito. For the international community, the mere fact that a lot of countries would like to align with us in terms of defense and security Australia, Japan, of course, we have the US.
Right.
Others are coming up. I don't want to mention them until they're finalized. It
Right.
shows that this initiative of transparency is effective. Will this cause a change in the behavior of the Coast Guard, the Navy, and the Maritime Militia, or the Chinese Communist Party? No. Probably yes, but it will take an interplay of the different instruments of national power.
Right. So don't expect an overnight change. It's not like China will suddenly change its behavior, but at least you're getting other parts moving. The domestic public opinion, there's at least an alignment on basic facts, which was not there before, right? Because there was a lot of disinformation and counter narratives, na clearly echoing Chinese line. And the other one is at least a whole community of nations are rallying behind us. Something that I want to discuss a little bit more. Let's focus on the immediate two audiences, perhaps, we have dito sa West Philippine Sea. One is obviously the rest of ASEAN. Admiral, can you tell me a little bit about what is your understanding? Again, DFA, I'm sure, will have official statement, but from a Navy standpoint, what is your understanding of the rest of the ASEAN? The reason I'm saying this is because I understand the skepticism of a lot of Filipinos about ASEAN. I heard words like ASEAN is useless, ASEAN is enabler, but things are moving forward with Vietnam because there's some alignment of interest and understanding of the nature of threat in the area. And in fairness to Indonesia, I would say, obviously Indonesia is not a direct claimant, but they have their own headache in the Natuna area because China's claims are just so expansive that they're bleeding into Indonesian exclusive economic zone and water. So Indonesia, for instance, last year proposed an all-ASEAN naval exercises. From my understanding, Singapore and Malaysia attended, but not the Philippines. Can you tell us a little bit about the rest of ASEAN or other West Philippine Sea claimant states or South China Sea claimant states? How is that going in terms of naval diplomacy and defense diplomacy?
Yes, if you look at the ASEAN, we could have them in two groups, Maritime ASEAN
Yeah.
and Continental ASEAN. For Maritime ASEAN, we have Malaysia, we have Vietnam, we have Indonesia. We have good relations with Vietnam. Mind you, Vietnam has the highest number of fishers.
21, 25?
22. In the West
22,
Philippine
yes,
Sea.
because yeah.
They're militarizing it. They're reclaiming, they're building up their defenses there.
But not at the level of China, just to be clear, because the pro-China elements always use it.
Almost at the level.
Really?
Almost at the level.
But the sizes are not as
Not
big.
in
Admiral.
terms of size, in terms of capability. But Vietnam is friendly with us. They don't bar our fishermen from fishing. They don't give out false narratives against our actions. They engage us. We have a lot of naval activities, naval diplomacy activities with them.
Volleyball games. you
Volleyball
played,
games,
yeah,
football, basketball.
Yeah.
So it's like a case of do your thing.
Yeah.
What's good for your national interest, we'll do our thing and we'll talk. But not with the other ASEAN countries, maritime ASEAN countries. We have seen indifference on their part. It could be probably because they are happy the Philippines is taking the lead.
Or taking the punches.
Taking the
Someone-
punches, the lead and the punches, of course. When you take the lead, you take the punches
Yeah.
of standing up against the aggressive moves of the Chinese Communist Party. I would like to frame it as the CCP.
Yes,
Not
this is not China or
It's not
Chinese
China.
people. Yeah, yeah.
A lot of Chinese people are also oppressed,
Yeah.
limited freedom, etc. It's the Chinese Communist Party.
Right, right.
So they're happy, this maritime ASEAN countries are happy that we are taking the lead and the punches against the CCP's actions in the South China Sea.
And this is not the first time, right? I mean, back during the Aquino administration when we filed the arbitration case, it was only Vietnam to a certain degree supportive, but the rest, they were sitting quiet, but they benefited from our arbitration
Yes,
case.
yes.
So I'm seeing just a deja vu here. Like, we have been here before, Philippines on the forefront, taking the punches, continental Southeast Asian countries like Cambodia, essentially, towing the line of the other side, and then the others are kind of fence-sitters or waiting for their place. So we're in familiar territories in that sense.
We
Admiral.
are. And the mindset of the Filipino, if you notice, di baling mabugbog ka if you believe in what you're doing.
Right.
If you believe that you're standing up for what is right. You take the punches, you take everything. On a bigger scale, yun ang mindset natin when it comes to ASEAN and even in the international community. And little wonder, ang nakakaintindi sa atin, ang sumusuporta sa atin, Western countries that
Right.
we mentioned earlier. And they would like for international law to stand in this part of the globe. They have also a direct interest. If international law will not stand in this part of the globe, it will not also stand in their own region. Hence their support for us.
Right.
And all this support is just raising the bar of deterrence. Na kumbaga kung may hurdle dapat nagagawin ang Chinese Communist Party,
Right.
tinataasan natin.
You raise the costs.
We raise the
for
cost for them.
misbehavior. Yeah.
Hoping that this will be a deterrent action enough for them to hold back.
The reason I mentioned the rest of ASEAN is because China may have the biggest fleet in the world, but if the rest of ASEAN, let's say Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, essentially those three, I don't know what Brunei, there's a long conversation. If these three countries also do what we're doing, ma-overstretch talaga ang China eh, right?
We could be successful. Success story is Latin America.
Mm.
Two countries there, because of good strategic communication, with help from allies, they were able to say that the Chinese fishing fleet, the CCP fishing fleet, has intruded to our EEZ and
This
let
is
us boycott their
Argentina,
catch.
Chile, I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, let's boycott their catch.
Interesting.
And because of that,
I didn't see a
fishing
lot of
fleet-
coverage of that. That's very interesting, yeah.
the fishing fleet had to move out to international waters. If the maritime ASEAN countries could do the same thing,
Yeah.
we're getting help from some of our allies, partners right now, along that line, we will have a stronger voice. And again, transparency initiative, then we have the economic power of the country and of ASEAN. If the CCP and the fishing fleet would see that they get hit through the fishing bans that this time ASEAN would institute against them, then probably we could see there would be a greater effort to see a behavioral change in the CCP's agents of aggression.
That's a very good point. That I mean, usually when people talk about Latin America, these are countries where there's a lot of anti-American sentiment because of their own history and all, and there's a lot of engagement with China. But when you talk to people from Brazil to Argentina to Chile, actually behind the scenes they're saying, no, we're not blind to what China is doing, and especially some of these coastal countries with Pacific Ocean, like Chile, for instance, or even. And they are also worried about all of this illegal fishing that is happening all the way into their waters. It's interesting that there's parang walang masyadong coverage of lessons learned from the other side of the Pacific Basin, diba? And how we can learn. And Filipinos, obviously, we have a lot of cultural commonalities with our Latin American.
Because everybody would like to see a change in behavior affected by kinetic action,
Right.
affected by the military instrument. At the highest level of government, it would be an interplay of the different instruments of national power. So like what you said, is the transparency initiative effective? Wag natin ituloy yan, hindi effective, hindi ano. Little by little, it's part of the entire toolkit
Exactly.
that the government has, and they would use the appropriate tool depending on how government sees it.
Right. My term for that is necessary but not sufficient. In a sense that dapat dagdagan mo lang. Parang sasabihin mo, like in a leader, syempre dapat matalino siya, pero hindi pwede matalino lang. Dapat may puso, dapat may gano'n. So I think people have to, it's not binary, useless, useful. It is useful, but there are other things that have to come into play. And those are the things I want to discuss. Speaking of other things, the other side of this equation is the United States, right? I mean, I think so far, at least, knock on the wood, the Chinese realize armed attack is out of question because that will automatically trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty, and the Americans will have to be involved whether they want it or not, because a lot is also at stake for the Americans. Speaking of that, Admiral, there's some conversation, I mean, since last time we talked, about whether the MDT should be modified, the operational guidelines, among other things. So, for instance, last year there was this Indo-Pacific Command internal memo that was declassified, which shows that some of the lawyers at the Pentagon, especially Indo-PACOM in Hawaii, were suggesting maybe hindi lang arm attack in the sense of kinetic action, a missile or gun or even laser, military laser, but anything that leads to injury, right? So it's not the modality, it's the outcome. It's an outcome-oriented interpretation of MDT rather than modality. So, wala akong pake kung gumamit ka ng, baseball bat or ano. Pag may namatay na Pilipino or serious injury, then maybe we have to talk about MDT. And the reason I want to go back to this also, Admiral, is because people talk about mutual defense treaty as if it's a mutual offense treaty. But if you read the mutual defense, marami pang steps eh. Pwede mo dadalhin sa United Nations Security Council, may constitutional consultations within US, and then there's like about how the two allies can strengthen it. What I'm saying is that MDT is not the nuclear option per se. It's just a whole, ladder of movements towards maybe some armed joint intervention, right? So what is your read of that? Because General Bronner was absolutely clear earlier this year that the Americans offered help when nung nangyari talaga yung nasa June, di ba? Yung mid-June incident. But we said, no, we can take care of this. So obviously, I know ang gusto natin gawin is ipakita sa mundo na hindi tayo pawns ng US. Hindi ito proxy war. We are standing up for our own. We can do it. But at some point, you also have to have leverage that alliance, right?
Yeah, first and foremost, while the MDT is at the level of our political leaders
Right.
and defense leaders,
It's a policy question.
yeah, it's a policy question. We have first to understand that it was crafted in the 1950s, wherein the instruments of warfare were straightforward.
Right.
Guns, missiles, Today, there are non-lethal that if you use, depending on the scale, it could become lethal.
In outcome.
The
Yeah.
outcome will be
Yeah.
lethal. Probably this will now be subject to discussions at the higher level. Let's say malign influence with the intent of toppling a duly established government.
Right.
What about subverting peace and order
Yeah.
to start a revolution within a country?
Yung mga deep fakes or cheap
Deep
fakes
fakes
na
or
ginawa
AI,
nila.
with the advent of AI and everything.
Yeah.
So probably, I believe our defense leaders and our the highest levels of government have already this in mind. That's why there has been talk of reviewing the MDT. Secondly, the MDT is not just a switch that you turn on
Absolutely. Yeah.
outrightly.
Yeah.
There's a process for that. It may not even come in directly in the form of military assistance, raising the cost.
Right.
For all we know, the current activities being done right now in the West Philippine Sea is already designed to raise the cost so that the military aspect of the MDT would not have to be activated. If you recall, recently we had MMCA's, multilateral maritime
Right.
cooperative activities. And for the first time, countries are sending ships here to do joint sails, joint patrols. There are joint patrols already
Yeah.
in the West Philippine Sea within our EEZ. And we have seen a change in the behavior of the PLA Navy, the CCG, and the PLA and the Maritime Militia.
Right.
Meaning to say, the presence of other countries who have a stake in the maritime domain has caused a change in the behavior of the CCP.
In what sense, Admiral? Just for some of the critics, because they say, "Oh, if it's changing, why are we still seeing these incidents?"
Because these incidents were done separately from the multilateral activities. During the MMCAs, we have seen that, kumbaga, behave sila.
Yung mga Chinese, they're not doing anything crazy. Yeah.
CCG and the Maritime Militia. Now, you mentioned about the Chief of Staff declining an offer for assistance. When it comes to EEZ, territorial claims, this is the mandate of the AFP.
Right. Yeah.
Atin ito.
Yeah.
When it comes to international standing up, may stake ang ibang bansa rito.
Right.
That's why we partner with them. We are thankful for our ally and other partners that they are there to ensure that we could conduct the RORE by ourselves.
Right.
Kumbaga, nandyan kayo, amin ito. Yun ang natin, yun ang posturing natin sa West Philippine Sea.
August was a very busy month for defense diplomacy. Again, with the Americans, for instance, we had the first ever 2+2 here in Manila, the fourth overall, but here in Manila. And the Americans announced a $500 million package just for 1 year. And from my understanding of talking to Ambassador Romualdez, we're looking at perhaps up to $3 billion in total over the next 4 or 5 years. And it looks like there's a lot of confidence. This is so bipartisan that it's irrelevant who's going to be the next American president. If anything, we have folks who are top strategists in the Republican side who said we may even increase it further if there is a change in administration next year, in favor of the Republican Party. How important is that defense aid from America in terms of modernizing of AFP? Something we touched on in the previous conversation, but I want to go back to this.
Of course, very important. First and foremost, we have to thank the government, the current administration, $35 billion worth of projects, capability upgrades.
Over the next decade, yeah.
Over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Apart from that, we welcome everything we could get from our partners that would help jumpstart our capability development. And of course, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of capability that will be afforded to us. If you notice our exercises like Balikatan, we have a lot of new equipment, weaponry, that gives us an insight what we would have to develop to be able to operate such an equipment. And this was the other side raised.
HIMARS, for instance, a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
HIMARS usage.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, kumbaga, itong mga ganitong alok sa atin, we welcome this, provided that this is designed for our own, basically for defense. It's
Yeah.
not for offensive purposes. And we need all the help right now when it comes to developing our capability. And we welcome this.
Speaking of capability, siguro kasama din dyan yung developing our own defense industry, having parking lots for our Navy. I mean, you cannot, it doesn't make sense to buy, I don't know, a Lamborghini and then have no parking lot for it. Or wala kang pang maintenance, right? Like, that's the most foolish
Right.
thing you can do, right? So we can talk about shiny weapon systems and all of that, but you have to have a kind of a defense industry, maintenance capacity. How important it is for the U.S. to put that as part of the package to also help us to develop our own.
Even without the U.S. side, there's already a pending bill right now
Right.
to put up a defense zone somewhere in Bataan that would allow us to be able to produce what we need
Right.
for continuity. It is useless just to buy.
Exactly.
Other countries have started 25 years ago, started developing.
South Korea.
South Korea.
Yeah.
Turkey.
Turkey, yeah, Turkey.
Right now, they
yeah.
supply to the world.
Absolutely.
Somehow, we have to start somewhere,
Interesting.
someplace.
So you're saying South Korea and Turkey, because two are U.S. ally, one via NATO, one directly. These were developing countries. In the case of Turkey, it's still a developing country. Korea, newly developed country, but they're top 10 in the world. I mean, in terms of drones, the Turkish are way ahead of almost everyone else. On so many fronts, the South Koreans are already a world leader. I mean, grabe, no? So there are lessons for us, right? These are mid-sized countries, just like us.
Yes. And
they're not huge countries, yeah.
They started from zero.
Yes.
A journey of 1,000 miles. They took the first step
Yep.
to develop their own defense industry. And there's a pending bill right now, hopefully it will be approved soon, that would allow us to have the basic rudiments to establish our own defense industry somewhere in Bataan, close to the
Right.
government arsenal.
I mean, we developed bongbong missiles back in the day, right?
Back in the days, we still have
Yeah, well-
samples of those bongbong missiles.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So now we have President Bongbong. Maybe it's time to pick up where we left off, right? Yeah. I mean, we're top 5 shipbuilding nation on earth, right? It doesn't make sense for us not to have also among the biggest naval ship capability building facilities, right?
Filipinos are good when we work abroad.
Right.
Filipinos are good when we work for
international
expats in country.
companies, yeah.
We need to tap into the skill of the Filipino
Right.
to start our own. Our defense industry will provide us, will shorten our logistical chain.
Right.
It will provide jobs for Filipinos. We will be spending the money here, hence we will be spurring up the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of spillover effect. I mean, internet is a product of military research, right?
Yes,
A lot of things
yes.
we take for granted did not start with tech companies. It started somewhere else, and then it spilled over. So what you're saying is that, so in a way, you can also integrate that into all of these other strategic investment deals we're having, right? So we have the JAFUS, Japan, Philippine, US. I call it JAFUS to make it sure it rhymes with AUKUS. There's like a corridor, Luzon corridor investments. Like these things could be connected also to defense, right?
Yes, of
Because
course.
everything is semi-dual use. I mean, semiconductors could be used for weapon systems. We can develop our own drone industry, right? We have those basic science and technology capabilities.
We're good at playing with drones,
Yeah.
FPV, first-person view drones. We need to develop this
Yeah.
and see how we could swing them for defense purposes.
And it makes sense, right? In a sense that we saw in Ukraine, we saw in the Red Sea, how less developed countries or smaller countries, by using drone, they can sink a whole. Well, in the case of Russians, they lost a lot of big assets because of the drones that the Ukrainians are using, right? Or the Houthis using
Yes.
drones or all sorts of asymmetric capabilities to harass major powers, right? So, what are the lessons for us in terms of West Philippine Sea, in terms of asymmetric capability development, not building aircraft carriers, but building drones, building some of these missile
Yeah,
systems?
I've been saying many times that it's not a matter of matching ship for ship
Yeah.
or aircraft for aircraft. It's the country, it's the organization which is the better strategy. Our S&D mentioned the comprehensive archipelago defense concept,
Right.
which would allow us to project forces all the way up to the EEZ. We could leverage our strengths as an archipelago to offset any advantage of any adversary, not just the CCP, any adversary. So we look at our strength, how we could maximize this. Focus on the choke points. Look at the internal dynamics of the other side, how we could offset any advantage they have on the military side.
Right.
In the West Philippines, the same thing. We don't need X number of ships to be able to match up to their Navy, the PLA Navy. We don't need Y number of aircraft. It's not 1:1.
Right.
It's having the better strategy to offset any disadvantage that we have.
And new innovations in technology, cheaper products can make it.
Cheaper, more
Yeah.
expedient.
Yeah.
We could develop them locally. And if everybody could have this, you will have 100 million strong army
Right.
of Filipinos.
Right.
We need to fight for our national interest.
I mean, I heard, I mean, this was half joking that maybe our Bajau brothers could also help. I mean, they can swim like crazy, right? I mean, they're extremely skilled people,
Not
right?
only the Bajaus,
Yeah.
the Tausus, the
Tao-
Yakans, everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Kumbaga,
Yeah.
ito ay laban ng lahat ng Pilipino.
Exactly. Yeah.
Regardless where you're from, where you're Ilonggo, Bicolano,
Right.
Ilocano, Cebuano.
Exactly. So you need a whole of nation approach.
Yes, yes.
In that sense. Now, Admiral, let's go back to the point we raised actually early on, which is this kind of a diversified approach we have to our defense diplomacy. This idea that, we see from China's disinformation or pro-Beijing channels and networks saying, oh, the Philippines is just joining a proxy war, we are a pawn of America. It's like, well, this is our own exclusive economy. How could we be a proxy war when sa sarili natin bakuran nangyayari yan? Like, how can you say that's a proxy war? But in fairness to President Bongbong Marcos, he constantly says this is not about siding with one superpower against another. It's not about joining another Cold War. We don't want that. This is about just the minimums, protecting our interests. And we see an extremely active defense diplomacy. We had the German Defense Minister Pistorius here the other week. We had the first ever joint drills with the Japanese. Not long after we signed the Reciprocal Access Agreement, things are moving with the Vietnamese, the Indians, obviously, the South Koreans. I'm sure even the Turks. The Turks have been telling me for quite some time they're interested to cultivate ties with the Philippines noon pa, 2017-18. So this is a very diverse field of partners, networks of partners we're looking at. Is this kind of a multi-alignment, meaning we don't want to align with any side? It's about working with different sides so that we can put together a coalition of friends and partners.
I keep saying that nations would always act or behave like people. If people have personal interest, nations have national interest. Wherever our national interests would overlap or coincide, then let's tango.
Right.
Let's work together. Our interest here is territorial integrity, which has a stake which could spill over to the rules-based approach.
Yeah.
Because we need international law to ensure that what is ours is ours. Other countries have the same interest for international law to stand firm, to stand tall in this part of the globe, to be respected. If not, if international law would fail in the South China Sea, they would be affected. It would impact on, number one, Canada. They also have overlapping claims with their neighboring countries.
Right.
Secondly, a lot of these countries rely on the sea for maritime trade.
Right.
They would like to see free flow of goods, free and open waters. Hence, they're coming here to show that they support us in our, not in our territorial stand, indirectly. Directly, they support us with our stand on international law.
Right.
And I would like to thank them personally for that, for coming here, for sending ships, for giving out statements of support each time there is an illegal, coercive, aggressive action done against us.
And some of these countries see a long-term strategic interest, like India, for instance. I think they even used the word West Philippine Sea when former Mr. Jai Shankar was here earlier this year. He used also the term West Philippine Sea. Their naval officials, I remember, a few years back, used the West Philippine Sea. The Indians obviously want to develop also their defense industry, have more exports to this part of the world. They have their own headaches with the Chinese. They want to make sure that the Indian Ocean is not also being too much traversed by their Chinese rivals, in addition to their own territorial disputes in the Himalayas. So it looks like some of these countries are not only having just a temporary alignment of interest, hindi ito like tactical alliance lang. They're looking at something more long-term. I mean, the South Koreans, they're quite quiet because of their North Korea problem, but they have been our major also partner in terms of defense industry and all. And these are countries who are somehow non-aligned, especially India. It has no treaty alliance with anyone, right? Can you tell us a little bit about these countries, non-Western countries? Because you mentioned Western countries, but these are non-West. India is not a Western country, right? Turkey is not a Western country, right?
Again, the principles of international law transcend political interest. When your national interest is at stake, regardless of the political alignment, we would expect everybody to rally behind. Now, bring this thought to the international arena. Like what you said, India, with no agreement,
Alliance with
alliance
anyone.
with anybody,
Yeah.
how come they're supporting us? Because indirectly, their support for us would also rebound back as a support for them,
Right.
because they face the similar situations.
Yeah.
The line of actual control between
Yeah.
India
Sa
and China,
Himalayas. Yeah.
the Bay.
Yeah.
So they would support us because indirectly they're also supporting themselves.
Right.
It is showing the world that international law should stand firm in the South China Sea, in the West Philippine Sea. And then, if needed, the world could also say international law should stand firm in the interest of India.
Obviously, we see a lot of metaphors being thrown around that Taiwan could be the next Ukraine or kind of frontline state. I heard, and I think we'll have a Polish foreign minister soon here, that the Philippines could be like a Poland. Not the Poland that disappeared in history 3 times. I'm talking about the Poland of the past 50, 30, 20 years, which is this very strong Eastern European country, EU member, a strong defense player, building up themselves, even helping Ukraine very directly. Could we become that kind of a major middle power in this part of the world, right? Not frontline like Taiwan, but kind of there in the thick of
Stabilizing
action.
factor.
Exactly, an anchor, a pivot of stability in this part of the world.
From the defense and security, DN and AFP perspective, we live on plans. What if
Right.
this happens? We look at
Scenarios, yeah.
potential flashpoints, not only the cross-strait, Taiwan and mainland China. We look at Straits of Malacca. We look at North and South Korea. We look at the Middle East,
Right.
Red Sea,
Persian Gulf.
Houthis, Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
The closest of this would be Taiwan.
Right.
So since this is the closest, then from our planning considerations, what if this would happen? Are we prepared? What if there would be a backflow of the 200,000 Filipinos and other foreign nationals? Are we ready to receive them? If not, they may also cause a problem domestically. So we should prepare for that. How would they come in? Do we have ports to receive them if they're only, 100 miles, a little over 100 miles from our northernmost island? Do we have the seaports to receive them, or the boats that would come in, the ship that would come in? Do we have the airports to receive them? So we need to develop this. These are not only defense. This is an aspect of the socio-cultural side, of the economic side, all because of the proximity that we have to Taiwan. The stronger we build up our capacity to receive whatever backlash there would be for a potential conflict, cross-strait conflict, the more stable the region would be.
Can you tell me a little bit about Taiwan more? Because it looks like China is worried about a potential shift in the Philippine-Taiwan policy, not in terms of one China policy, but the Philippines getting more involved, let's just say, on the Taiwan question. EDCA bases to the north, more Balikatan exercises towards the north. Since last time we talked, a lot has happened vis-a-vis the Taiwan question. To the degree that you can share, and I know you cannot make policy statements, and of course there are confidential information there. But the degree that you can share, what is the Philippines' national interest on the Taiwan question, and what are we doing about it?
Of course, we have almost 200,000 Filipinos there. Geopolitically, we're close to them. Socioculturally, we have good ties with them. Maraming mga Taiwanese rito.
Yeah.
Maraming Filipinos nagsettle
And
na
their
rin doon.
democracy, vibrant democracy.
Vibrant
like us.
democracy and everything. Economic conditions, we played with them, and we're looking at, in the event of a decoupling with mainland, they could be one of the options. In fact, they're already shifting.
Yeah.
Some companies are shifting
They're
to them.
superpower in semiconductors.
Semiconductors. So there's a lot at stake for the
Right.
Philippines. And to turn a blind eye to that, to not prepare for any eventuality, would make the AFP and the remiss of our mandate. Allow me to bring this to a local example, which could have probably the same application. We know every year we get hit by around 20, 24 typhoons.
Typhoons, yeah.
Kung hindi tayo maghahanda, we are remiss of our function. We know that every year we get hit. The most likely scenario, we have to prepare for that. So in the event that Taiwan, the cross straits would become more volatile,
Yeah.
could erupt into conflict, we should be ready for that. Hence, it is now part of our interest,
Yeah.
mentioned in the National Security Policy of 2023 to 2028, that we have to give Taiwan more attention.
So we cannot be quote-unquote neutral in the sense, ay, wala kaming alam dyan. Which is what a lot of ASEAN countries are trying to do, right? Like, oh, this is between China and Taiwan. We don't want to get involved.
It's still a one China policy. That's government stand.
Yeah.
But in the event that things would escalate,
Operationally, we cannot be indifferent.
yes, we have to prepare for that.
Yeah, and obviously, if our allies get involved, then we have a mutual defense treaty. If people forget, it goes both ways.
Yes,
It's
well,
not about us just getting help from U.S. The U.S. will also ask for help if
right.
ever they get involved. So that's why it's a very sensitive issue. And my sense is that's why also China is extra sensitive to the Philippines, because we're the only one in the entire ASEAN which is so close to Taiwan. In fact, we're closer to Taipei than any major ASEAN capital. It's just 1 hour and 15 minutes. I did
Yep.
almost just 1 hour with PAL the other month, and going to Jakarta, going to Singapore, but it's
3 hours.
4 hours,
Yeah.
5 hours. It's so far. Vietnam, maybe 2, 3 hours. So it's a geographic reality is staring us in the face. We cannot be indifferent to the Taiwan question, right?
If you look at the action of the CCP, if you're a bully, mga bata sa eskwelahan,
Yeah,
you rely on your size, on your strength.
right.
Kung sa international arena, if your main tool is your military instrument of national power, you would rely on it more than you would on diplomacy or information or socio-cultural activities. That's what's happening right now. It could be probably that for lack of better approaches on the other instruments of national power, the CCP is relying more on the military instrument to get a message across.
But it's not really working in a sense that Taiwan is even more, fortifying its position and the Philippines is further strengthening its ties with the whole sets of nations, right?
And hopefully that message gets all the way up to the highest levels of the CCP to force a change in mindset and eventually a change in behavior at the tactical level.
Right, right. Or at least a recalibration because
A
things,
recalibration, yes.
because things are moving in a very, very dangerous direction. I mean, speaking of recalibration, I mean, I always hear na, oh, ito yung kailangan ng gawin ng Pilipinas. But the ball is in China's court. We are not the one trying to, take over other countries' land features, right? We're not the one bullying other countries. So
We're not escalating.
we're not escalating, yeah. So
Yeah.
the de-escalation should be on them, not on
It should be on
us.
them, yes.
Yeah.
We're only doing what the mandate of the Navy and the AFP requires us to do. To not perform those activities, we would be remiss of our mandate. All our actions are within the rules of engagement at the operational level, within domestic and international law. Hence, we are not escalating. It's the other side that should de-escalate.
Because they're the one pushing the envelope too much, even in violation of international law. I know, again, this is perhaps speculative, but in terms of capability developments, what are the areas that are priorities for the Philippine Navy? We kind of touched on asymmetric, but in terms of conventional capability development, what are the things we have to focus
We
on?
need a stronger fleet. Right now, we have 2 corvettes coming, the first one next year, 6 offshore patrol vessels. Our Marine Corps has their own capability development plans, special operations, naval air warfare. The entire naval organization has different capability plans for the different units. When all this start to kick in, you would see a modern and multi-capable Navy, and one that the Filipino people will be proud of, one that befits a seafaring nation.
Right.
There is a thrust right now, I will say as much as I could, to look into the asymmetric side. This asymmetric side, you mentioned drones, you mentioned commercial off-the-shelf
Right.
that could have dual use. There's already an effort right now, not only for the Philippine Navy, but for the entire armed forces.
And we're looking at green water capability development to make the Philippine Navy at least a green water capable one?
Yes, yep.
Capable of operating in multiple regional waters. Kasi people forget, hindi lang West Philippines yung problema natin or yung tri-border natin with Indonesia and Malaysia because of the whole ISIS and Daesh. But we have a whole Western Pacific, Philippine Sea to take care of, right? And that's why the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept is coming in. Obviously, we're looking into a final paper on that. I'm sure as we speak, it's under development, so I don't want to push you too much on that. Last point, Admiral, we can have a long conversation about domestic politics and economy and all, and we have other guests to take care of that, never mind. But in fairness to President Marcos Jr., if there's one area where I think any reasonable, patriotic Filipino can agree on, which is, in fairness, he's doing his part, right? He's laying out a vision for the Philippines, and he's building on the good efforts of other presidents from Ramos to Aquino, and even what Marcos Sr. built back in the day, our capability on the ground. How important is the role of the Commander-in-Chief, and what are the things that you hope to see to continue in the coming years?
The Commander-in-Chief sets the tone for the defense establishment. For the record, I would like to say it is this administration that has given as a matter of national policy. The President stated in February of last year or January of last year, in his visit to Visayas Command, he said, he told the troops, the AFP is now shifting from internal security to external defense. He is the first commander-in-chief to state that as a matter of his policy. The Secretary of Defense amplified that by stating that we will be implementing a comprehensive archipelago defense concept. We will now be looking at the entire territory all the way up to the expanse of the exclusive economic zone.
Right.
These two statements have been the cornerstone of the armed forces in developing our capability, in looking at the way we do things. And after having been embroiled in the internal conflict for 6 decades, there's a lot of changing the mindset,
Yeah.
our system and processes, a lot of changes to be done to the AFP. But we're up to the challenge, and we welcome it. This will allow us the opportunity to finally be an armed forces of the people responsible for external defense.
And we should be a kind of a middle power, without any reluctance, right? That's the goal here. Philippines to be a legitimate, full-fledged 21st century middle power.
We are a middle power. Our economic managers have already stated that. Sometimes, though, our mindset, our behavior is that of a third world. We need to
Or
grasp
small country.
small country.
Yeah.
Allow me to give this as an illustration. If you look at the slum areas, simpleng pangalan ng tao. Deprive them of that, gulo aabutin mo. Batuhan, etc.
It's a survival mindset. Yeah.
It's a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
Look at the class, the middle class.
Yeah.
They're more tolerant. Being a middle power, we should be more tolerant.
Tolerant of what?
There are other avenues to address, let's say, the West Philippine Sea.
Right.
Not only kinetic action. If the transparency initiative is the option of the government, so be it. Let's support it. If the track is diplomacy, let's support it. All the while, the defense establishment is just preparing, performing its mandate. It would be unbecoming of the military to say that the first option for the West Philippines would be diplomacy. That's beyond us. That should not even be heard from us. Our mandate is the integrity of the territory. It is war and defense. We should be good with what we have.
Right.
And I've been saying this many times. Given more, we can perform even better. If this is what the government has given us, we should be the best in utilizing it. Kumbaga, ang nabibigay siya balisong, you should be the best balisong fighter.
Right.
To 9mm pistol, you should be the best in the world. Given more, we could perform even better. And I believe the AFP is up to the challenge, and we have proven ourselves historically, not only domestically, but even abroad. Battle of Yultong in Korea. We have performed well in the international arena.
Right.
And these stories would make us proud that we have an AFP with men and women who could perform, given what we have, with partners and allies with more modern equipment.
Yeah, I was in Busan and I visited the War Memorial, and Filipinos' name were there. President Ramos is highly respected for his service there. Thank you so much for that note. I mean, just to add, middle class, aside from their moderation and sophistication, are also known for being very proactive, shaping democratic movements, shaping good governance and reforms and all. And I think being a mid-sized, medium power is also about that, being a constructive, proactive player in the 21st century international political system.
Yes, and if you notice the armed forces right now, we have that shift away from internal security coincides with our being a middle power.
Right.
We see less issues right now of human rights abuses by the AFP, which is good for us. We now respect IHL and human rights better. So all of this augurs well for a better Philippines.
On that positive note, thank you very much, Admiral. Looking forward to catching up with you in the coming weeks and months. Hopefully, even on more positive note. Na wala sanang incident. Thank you so much, Admiral.
You're welcome, Richard, and anytime. Feel free.
As always, our pleasure. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Heydarian, and that was The View from Manila. We're One News, all sides, all the time.